Hey crew, it's Pitt and I am back to piss some people off. We are continuing in our exploring ideologies and we are going to be talking about the Communist Party. We are reading aloud from the Manifesto of the Communist Party. We will be discussing as we go along. But before we begin, if you are unfamiliar with me or any of my unconventional beliefs, there are playlists linked in this corner up here. If you get lost at any point in time about the things I am talking about, if you want to know more about where I stand on any particular issue, you can probably find it in these playlists that are linked here in the box down below, along with the source material. I am almost certainly going to step on toes because I do not believe in communism as a governmental system. I believe in voluntarism. I believe in communalism, but not communism. And so we're going to read this and we're going to talk about the pros and cons as they come along. With that being said, let us dive into the text of the Manifesto of the Communist Party by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. All the old powers of Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this specter. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals and German police spies. Where is the party in opposition that has not been decried as communistic by its opponents in power? Sorry. Part of this is vocal therapy. It is what it is. Where the opposition that has not hurled back the branding reproach of communism against the more advanced opposition parties, as well as against its reactionary adversaries. Two things result from this fact. Communism is already acknowledged by all European powers to be in itself a power. It is high time that communists should openly, in the face of the whole world, publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet this nursery tale of the specter of communism with a manifesto of the party itself, the fairy tale of what it actually wants. To this end, the communists of various nationalities have assembled in London and sketched the following manifesto to be published in English, French, German, Italian, Flemish, and Danish languages. Bourgeoisie and the proletarians. We are going to pop out these footnotes real quick. A is, by bourgeoisie is meant the class of the modern capitalists, owners of the means of social production and employers of wage labor. By proletariat, the class of modern wage laborers who, having no means of production of their own, are reduced to selling their labor power in order to survive. And B, which will pop up in just a second, it's talking about society, that is, all written history. In 1847, the prehistory of society, the societal organization existing previous to the recorded history, was all but unknown. Since then, Haxtenhausen discovered common ownership of land in Russia. Maurer proved it to be the social foundation from which all Teutonic races started in history, and by village communities were found to be, or to have been, the primitive form of society everywhere from India to Ireland. The inner organization of this primitive communistic society was laid bare in its typical form by Morgan's crowning discovery of the true nature of the gens and its relation to the tribe. With the dissolution of these primeval communities, society begins to be differentiated into separate and finally antagonistic classes. I have attempted to retrace this process of dissolution in Der Ursprung der Familie des Puritentums und des Staats, 2nd edition, Stuttgart, 1886. For history and all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Let's stop and talk about it real quick because this is both true and untrue. Private property has always been a thing. This was my boat. This is my food. This is my tent. This is my wife. These are my children. This is mine. That is a thing. That is the thing that communism likes to overlook. They like to think that everything is communal, and that has never, ever been the case. Do people share? Absolutely. Was it imperative to share in villages? Absolutely. Was it a decision by many people to live in that area? More than likely. But Was there no personal property? Fuck no, that's stupid. Was it an ideal situation for there to be no personal property? Fuck no, that's stupid. Like, that is so completely devoid of anything that it is impossible to conceive. Once upon a time, way back in the history of man, population was not that great. There were a few hundred people living in any one area at any point in time, and so they congregated together and through mutual benefit helped each other. They created communities, they formed villages and eventually cities and towns and the structure of government because eventually you get too many fucking people to share with. There's going to be somebody too lazy to work. There's going to be somebody too consumed with work to share. It is going to happen. That is why it can only exist in the idealized world of anything. To assume that getting rid of the structure is going to bring back this is remarkably stupid as well, right? Most people are not equipped to be their own boss. That is a simple truth that almost nobody who is not equipped to do that will admit. It is extremely hard to be self-motivated. It is extremely hard to set yourself a goal and work unrewarded towards that goal until its completion and then benefit from the fruit of your labor. And almost nobody will do that. Almost nobody will create their own individual work. Almost nobody will create their own individualized business. Almost nobody will publish a brand new thought. Almost nobody will publish a brand new book. Almost nobody undertakes the actual thing that they desire with the truth of their heart. Many people wish to learn to do music, but they don't. Many people wish to write a book, but they won't. Many people wish to rise above where they were born, but they refuse to take the steps that will allow them to get there. And that is the fundamental flaw in this whole thing. Communism in and of itself is a wonderful idea. Oh, I need this thing and everybody's going to help me to get it. That's a wonderful thing. But the problem is that while you want your wonderful thing, you really don't want them to have theirs. You don't want to be the one paying for someone else to live so that they can write a book. Almost certainly that is the truth. Almost certainly it is not your desire to fund somebody to be a streamer, right? If it was, I had to rely on you personally to do what I do here, and even if you completely agreed with everything that I ever said, the chances of you wanting to fund me to sit here and talk to the camera is almost nothing. Now, some people will do it. They will voluntarily give of their money, but that's never to be expected, and it is never to be the sole source of something, someone else's something. That is a terrible way to live. Taking from someone who has worked, invested themselves, and to distribute it as per your whims is slavery. And you may not see it. You see it as freedom. Well, they gave me a factory. What you going to do with it? You have no clue how to run a factory. You don't even know the parts and the processes that go in it. And if you don't understand that this is a real thing, go back to the Holodomor. Just that one instance. Go back to the Great Famine. Okay, the rollout, the societal restructuring that happened in China. What happened when they took the farms from the people who owned the farms, had been generations farming and selling this food, this produce to someone else, and they gave it to people who thought they deserved it with no recourse? Everybody starved. There was hunger and death on unimaginable scales. Every single time it happens. Some people have a drive, an inner want to change things in their life, and some people just do not. And that is a fundamental problem with the class struggle, because generally speaking, if you are in the bottom class, you don't have that drive. The best that you can hope for is that somebody will pay you to put out minimum effort, because I guarantee you, if you are over the age of 18 or 19 and you're making minimum wage, you put out the minimum effort. And you probably are fighting for this. You say that that wage is unfair. And I tell you that any time that you have to have a law saying that this is the least amount that you can pay a person to work, it's never going to be enough. But that minimum is not meant to be your maximum. It is not meant to be where you stay. If you are making minimum wage for longer than a year or two, you are the problem. Not capitalism, not classes, not the management. You. You are the problem, not the bourgeoisie. Rant. Next up. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guild master and journeyman. So let's pop out that note. A guild master, that is a full member of a guild, a master within, not the head of a guild. So not the person in charge, but the person doing the work. In a word, so guild master and journeyman. In a word, oppressor and oppressed. So the guild master is oppressing the journeyman. Well, that's a weak fucking argument. Someone who has spent 30 years becoming the master of their craft is taking someone under their wing. Well, I'm going to be the bad guy here because I have been this guy here. I am a damn fine worker. I have a desire to become more than anybody else. I outwork everybody that I have ever been around. So much so that when I started working at 12 years old for my dad, I worked weekends and I worked summers. And by the second summer, when I was 13 years old, I had my own crew. I could run a crew. Now, did I understand all of the technicalities? No, but I could get the job done. I did that until I joined the Navy. I had the desire to be the best at what I was doing. I have always had the desire to be the best. And so I become the person that people come to. I will run off a journeyman faster than anybody on the planet. I set high standards for me. And so I set them for anybody assigned to me. I have been the master carpenter. I have been the master boilermaker. I have been the master pipe fitter with a journeyman to train, and I work them fucking hard. But it's not slavery. You're getting wages. I work you hard. I make you learn why we do the things we do. The same way that I lay out the groundwork for these studies, I lay out the groundwork on why we make corners square. I work out the groundwork on why this radius has to be this length in order to bear this load. I do that to my apprentice all the way through. And either by the end of you being assigned to me, you are going to be the best hand that anybody else has seen, or you're going to quit. And that is true, but I'm not oppressing you. I will ride your ass. I will work you harder than you have ever thought about working ever in your life, but I'm doing more of it than you are. I guarantee that. I take the hardest load and always have. I work harder than anybody and always have. And so I'm not trying to oppress you. I'm trying to enlighten you. Working you hard is making you learn, and that is unequivocal. If you come and you give me half-ass effort, you are gone. I will make you quit. And it's not about oppression. I want you to be the best, and I refuse to accept less. And if you are going to be assigned to me, and my work is going to be reflected by what you do, then you are going to have to do the best. And that's not going to happen in a system where you're oppressed. Oh, did your feelings get hurt? Did somebody work you a little too hard? Did they demand that you actually do your job instead of playing on Facebook? How fucking dare they? Most of the problem that is in this is going to be mindset. And I'm going to hammer that home with a 10-pound maul on a 2-penny nail. It's going to happen. I'm going to hammer so hard that mindset makes the difference, that by the end of this, you will be convinced and you will want to change your life, and you will no longer entertain communism or socialism or anarcho-capitalism because they are all equally stupid. Oppressor and oppressed stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight that each time ended either in revolutionary reconstitution of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. In the earlier epochs of history, we find almost everywhere a complicated arrangement of society into various orders, a manifold gradation of social rank. In ancient Rome, we have patricians, knights, plebeians, slaves. In the Middle Ages, feudal lords, vassals, guildmasters, journeymen, apprentices, serfs. In almost all of these classes, again, subordinate gradations. And again, that is because not everybody is inclined to do correctly. I'm sorry, I did not transfer that for y'all. It is right here if you want to read it. The link is provided back down below for the text. I like to pull it up so y'all can read along with me and aren't just looking in my face. The modern bourgeoisie society that has sprouted from the ruins of feudal society has not done away with class antagonisms, but it has established new classes, new conditions of oppression, new forms of struggle in place of the old ones. Our epoch, the epoch of the bourgeoisie, possess, however, this distinctive feature. It has simplified the class antagonisms. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat. From the serfs of the Middle Ages sprang the chartered burghers of the earliest towns. From these burgesses, the first elements of the bourgeoisie were developed. The discovery of America, the rounding of the Cape, opened up fresh grounds for the rising bourgeoisie, the East Indian and Chinese markets, the colonization of America, trade with the colonies, the increase in the means of exchange and in commodities generally, gave to commerce, to navigation, to industry, an impulse never before known, and thereby to the revolutionary element in the tottering feudal society, a rapid development. The feudal system of industry, under which industrial production was monopolized by close guilds, now no longer sufficed for the growing wants of the new markets. The manufacturing system took its place. The guild masters were pushed on one side by the manufacturing middle class. Division of labor between the different corporate guilds vanished in the face of division of labor in each single workshop. Meantime, the markets kept ever growing, the demand ever rising. Even manufacture no longer sufficed. Thereupon steam and machinery revolutionized industrial production. The place of manufacture was taken by the giant, modern industry. The place of the industrial middle class by industrial millionaires. The leaders of the whole industrial armies, the modern bourgeoisie. Modern industry has established the world's market, for which the discovery of America paved the way. The market has given an immense development to commerce, to navigation, to communication by land. This development has, in its turn, reacted on the extension of industry, and in proportion as industry, commerce, navigation, and railways extended, in the same proportion the bourgeoisie developed, increased its capital, and pushed into the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. We see, therefore, how the modern bourgeoisie is itself the product of a long course of development, of a series of revolutions in the modes of production and of exchange. Each step in the development of the bourgeoisie was accompanied by a corresponding political advance of that class, an oppressed class under the sway of the feudal nobility, an armed and self-governing association in the medieval commune. We will check out this footnote. Commune was the name taken in France by the nascent towns, even before they had conquered from their feudal lords and masters local self-government and political rights as the third estate. Generally speaking, for the economical development of the bourgeoisie, England is here taken as the typical country. For its political development, France. Here, independent urban republic, as in Italy and Germany. There, taxable third estate of the monarchy, as in France. Afterwards, in the period of manufacture proper, serving either the semi-feudal or the absolute monarchy as a counterpoise against the nobility, and, in fact, cornerstone of the great monarchies in general. The bourgeoisie has at last, since the establishment of modern industry and of the world's market, conquered for itself, in the modern representative state, exclusive political sway. The executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie, historically, has played a most revolutionary part. The bourgeoisie, however, wherever it has gotten the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It has pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his natural superiors, and has left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, callous cash payment. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of a religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism, in the icy water of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into an exchange value, and in place of the numberless, indefeasible chartered freedoms, has set up that single, unconscionable freedom, free trade. In one word, for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions, it has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. This is reliant upon an assumption that is, again, fucking dumb. Like, it is remarkably stupid to think that there has never been currency before current monies. Even in prehistory, if you wanted something from someone else, you needed something in exchange, even if it was just cooperation with the collective, right? There has to be a system of exchange. You cannot come to me and demand from me the fruits of my labor with no recompense. That is the argument that they're making, but they're making it on the wrong side. They're saying that the money is the problem, that people are tied up in just getting money. Well, money is just a fucking substitute for time, right? It is to allow you to have an investment of your time that you can trade without actually having to invest your time. You go, you do this work in exchange for this currency so that you can exchange this currency for someone else's this work. It is a value holding system, and if it is properly founded in values, then there's no problem. The free market absolutely will take care of almost everything. Now, I'm not one for complete and total unregulated capitalism. There are severe problems with that. But to think that you are entitled to the benefits of somebody else's labor just because you don't agree in money is stupid. Like, ridiculously stupid. If you don't believe in money, then you believe that you need to be doing all of the things. Like in direct barter. And that's fine. Do your barter system. Raise your goats to change for sheep. Do that. But know full well that it is money too. Just because the value system changed does not mean that the investment of value is different. It's just a different form of currency. And if you get to the point where you don't get to decide what the value of it is, right? As a whole, we collectively have decided on the value of our money systems. Now, individually, you might disagree with that. you can make solid arguments about why the Fed is a horrible idea and that the gold standard should be the standard. That is because of value known, right? The petrodollar is, while it was an understandable investment in order to turn a currency from the singular market to a global market, still is not the same because despite what they may tell you, petroleum is not necessarily a limited resource. There is significant evidence these days to suggest that there might be a process by which the generation of oil is still continuing. There are dry wells that have mysteriously filled up again. That is a truth. You don't have to believe me, it is true. And so the petrodollar is not defined by a singular solid. Gold is a limited quantity. Now, we have mines, we are continuously bringing out more, but there are more people, right? And so the value is roughly accumulated. And so the gold standard is a better standard. But the petrodollar works as long as it remains a viable commodity and that it has a relative worth that is worth the value of your time. We are rapidly entering a point in time where the petrodollar is not going to be as viable. One, they are attempting to do away with petrol, and while I vehemently disagree with their reasoning behind it, natural evolution is going to take that to a point. There will be a different currency that's coming. Eventually, petro will fall off. It is also highly variable, dependent upon the attitudes of the people who are producing it. Gold is a little less of a problem. It has less fluctuation, and that's why it's a better currency. But either one of them is just a value exchange. I am working at this particular job for an hour so that I can buy a thing over here that is worth somebody else's hour of investment. That is the exchange of money, and it doesn't matter if you're using hard currency, or if you're just using seeds, or if you're using meat, or if you're using wampum and pretty rocks. It doesn't matter, right? That is a exchange of value. Trying to take that away is not going to change anything. Changing the value system doesn't mean that food does not have a value. That is a remarkably small-minded way of thinking about it, and I am not surprised to see it in here. The bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up to with reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into its paid wage laborers. The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its sentimental veil. It has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation. The bourgeoisie has disclosed how it came to pass that the brutal display of vigor in the Middle Ages, which reactionists so much admire, found its fitting complement in the most slothful indolence. It has been the first to show what man's activity can bring about. It has accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids. It has accomplished Roman aqueducts and Gothic cathedrals. It has conducted expeditions that put in the shade all former exoduses of nations and crusades. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relations of society. Fucking communists. Progress is a good thing. We have mechanical means of production that allows us to have clothing a lot cheaper than linen was. Like the level of not understanding here is wild to me. Like how can you make this argument that bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production. Even if we were in a classless society, it would not be able to exist and evolve without revolutionizing the instruments of production. And guess what? If there's no financial motivation for that, it's probably not going to happen. There's no innovation that happened in the USSR. There's no innovation happening in the People's Republic of China. They can steal ideas, but they don't come up with their own. Like, that is wild. Like, and I understand, right? Marx had no history to pull from for that, right? The entire history was serfdom, which is unarguably a bad thing. This particular experiment in freedom was 100 years old at this point. Like, it was barely even beginning. And even now, we don't have the process perfect, but we're a lot better than all the rest of them. Our main problem now is people arguing for this. Like, to think that the only reason that manufacturer is changing is because this elite group is oppressing people is the worst kind of victim fucking mentality that I can conceive of. And I can think of a lot of things. Conservation of the old modes of production in unaltered farms was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all earlier industrial classes. Yes, and now we have the ability to not be poor. Right? Like, we are at a point now in history where more people are not dirt poor than ever in the history of people, and we have more people. You are more likely to be able to subside or to exist in rural Africa due to the production levels that we have here than ever before. And that is just true. We can grow more things because of changes in agricultural practices that were not even in existence yet. This is before we had the gas engine. So tractors, diesel engines, that wasn't a thing. You may have had some steam, but at this point it was still very new. It wasn't yet what it would become. And what it became proves this whole argument wrong. Not just misguided, but like fundamentally flawed. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguish the bourgeoisie epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast, frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions are swept away. All new formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the whole surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. The bourgeoisie has, through its exploitation of the world's market, given a cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country. To the great chagrin of reactionists, it has drawn from under the feet of industry the national ground on which it stood. All old established national industries have been destroyed and are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations, by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw materials, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones, industries whose products are consumed not only at home but in every quarter of the globe. In place of the old wants, satisfied by the productions of the country, we find new wants, requiring for their satisfaction the products of distant lands and climes. In place of the old local and national seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations, and as in material, so also in intellectual production. The intellectual creations of individual nations become common property. National one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible, and from the numerous national and local literatures there arises a world literature. Okay, so now we're arguing against change, for one, which is completely natural to a communist, I guess. He is arguing that the change itself is the problem, right? We should have stuck with people just subsistence farming. That was much better for everyone when you had to hard scrabble every day for 12 to 16 hours. And I know there's this idealized fucking thing that people have that, well, back 400 years ago, people just farmed for their food and life was much better. They had more time. Bull fucking shit. Farming is hard work. Farming with animals is hard fucking work. Walking behind a mule, pulling a plow is hard work. Planting the seeds in those furrows is hard work. Maintaining the fields from weeds and pests and various things is hard work. It consumed most days entirely. And you don't have to like that. You don't have to agree with that. Am I saying that it was nose grind slavery like all the time? No. You had times when you could go fishing and you could go swimming. You could go to church. You could go do things and socialize and have parties and things. But most of your life was consumed by making sure that you had enough food to make it through the winter, by making sure that you had enough clothing, by making sure that you had enough wood to burn, by making sure that you were prepared for the harshness to come. And that's just a functional reality of life. Was there enjoyment in life? Yes, of course. But I like bananas. I do. I like apples. Down here in the South, we can only grow bitter apples, right? We can only grow the sour ones. We don't get to grow the sweet ones. It doesn't get cold enough. I love the fact that we can get Washington apples in Louisiana relatively cheap. That is a function of the free market economy. That is never going to be a function of communism. Nobody's going to grow an orchard, right? Not voluntarily. The government will tell you, and then you will go and you will half-ass it. And then if you eat your own apple, you go to jail or die. That is a very real thing. Romanticizing the past is a problem. In the past, most people had 8 to 10 kids. You know why? Because probably 4 of them were going to die. Almost certainly, disease, injuries was going to kill most of your progeny. And so you had big families. You needed the workforce to work. And so you enslaved your family. You exploited your family. No, they got to eat. They worked for their wages. That's what they did. They got to eat. They got to have housing. They got to have clothing. This mindset of victiming, right? Here in America, we have the greatest experiment of freedom ever. You can, for the first time in history, decide your own course of action. That was a brand new experiment here. It had not yet taken place in France. This was just before the French Revolution. Here in America, we were doing something different. You get to decide what you want to do with your life. You get to decide, I want to be a farmer or not. You get to decide, I want to be a laborer or not. You get to decide, I want to be a business owner or not. The problem being that most people don't want to. Most people are just perfectly happy, content to work for someone else. And that is a real thing. You may complain about your job, but not enough to want to do it for yourself. It takes an amazing amount of self-discipline to be self-motivated, to do something without somebody riding your ass. It's a lot of self-discipline. Most people are not cut out for it. Communism assumes that everybody is. That everybody will, if they are able. If you give me the time, of course I'm going to write a masterpiece, but no, you won't. You have the time now. You watch Netflix instead. You have the time now. You drink and party instead. You have the time to do the thing you want. You just choose not to use it correctly. You can take an hour a day and write a book in a year. You can do that. And that's editing. Like, You can, you choose not to, and that is the problem with humanity, writ large. It is a small percent of people who are willing to take the risk to do anything new. It is a small percent of people who are willing to take the risk to change their lives. But here you have the chance. Here, nobody tells you this is what you have to do with your life. From the time you were born until the time you die, you will do this. You have the ability to decide for yourself, I'm going to write a book. And then you do it. And then you get to benefit from that. But that doesn't happen in communism. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations, into civilization. The cheap prices of its commodities are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls, with which it forces the barbarians' intensely obstinate hatred of foreigners to capitulate. It compels all nations, on pain of extinction, to adopt the bourgeoisie mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst, an example, to become bourgeoisie themselves. In one word, it creates a world after its own image. The bourgeoisie has subjected the entire country to the rule of towns. It has created enormous cities. It has greatly increased the urban population as compared with the rural. It has thus rescued a considerable part of the population from the idiocy of rural life. Just as it has made the country dependent on the towns, so it has made barbarian and semi-barbarian countries dependent on the civilized ones. Nations of peasants on nations of bourgeoisie, the East on the West. The bourgeoisie keeps more and more doing away with the scattered state of the population, of the means of production and of property. It has agglomerated population, centralized means of production, and has concentrated property in a few hands. The necessary consequence of this was political centralization. Independent or but loosely connected provinces, with separate interests, laws, governments, and systems of taxation, became lumped together into one nation with one government, one code of laws, one national class interest, one frontier, and one customs tariff. The bourgeoisie, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than all the preceding generations together. Subjection of nature's forces to man, machinery, application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. What earlier century had even a presentiment that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor? We see, then, the means of production and of exchange on whose foundation the bourgeoisie built itself up were generated in feudal society. At a certain stage in the development of these means of production and of exchange, the conditions under which feudal society produced and exchanged the feudal organization of agriculture and manufacturing industry, in one word, the feudal relations of property, that's not one word, became no longer compatible with the already developed productive forces. They became so many fetters. They had to be burst asunder. Into their place stepped free competition, accompanied by a social and political constitution adapted to it, and by the economical and political sway of the bourgeoisie class. A similar movement is going on before our own eyes. Modern bourgeoisie society, with its relations of production, of exchange, and of property, a society that has conjured up such gigantic means of production and of exchange, is like the sorcerer, who is no longer able to control the powers of the netherworld, whom he has called up by his spells. For many a decade past, the history of industry and commerce is but the history of the revolt of modern productive forces against modern conditions of production. against the property relations that are conditions for the existence of the bourgeoisie and of its rule. It is enough to mention the commercial crises that, by their periodical return, put each on trial, each time more threateningly, the existence of the bourgeoisie society. In these crises, a great part not only of the existing products but also of the previously created productive forces is periodically destroyed. In these crises, there breaks out an epidemic that in the all earlier epochs would have seemed an absurdity, the epidemic of overproduction. Society suddenly finds itself put back into a state of momentary barbarism. It appears as if a famine, a universal war of devastation, had cut off the supply of every means of subsistence. Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed. And why? Because there is too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, too much industry, too much commerce. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of the conditions of bourgeoisie property. On the contrary, they have become too powerful for these conditions, by which they are fettered, and so soon as they overcome these fetters, they bring disorder into the whole of bourgeoisie society, endanger the existence of bourgeoisie property. The conditions of bourgeoisie society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. And how does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, by enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces. On the other, by the conquest of new markets and by the more thorough exploitation of the old ones. That is to say, by paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises, and by diminishing the means whereby crises are prevented. The weapons with which the bourgeoisie felled feudalism to the ground are now turned against the bourgeoisie itself. But not only has the bourgeoisie forged the weapons that bring death to itself, it has also called into existence the men who are to wield those weapons. The modern working class, the proletarians. In proportion as the bourgeoisie, i.e., capital, is developed, in the same proportion as the proletariat, the modern working class, developed, a class of laborers who live only so long as they find work, and who find work only so long as their labor increases capital. Yes, the laborers who must sell themselves piecemeal are a commodity, like every other article of commerce, and are consequently exposed to all the vicissitudes of competition, to all the fluctuations of the market. I can't take it no more. Again, it's a mindset thing, right? We have heard repeatedly an argument against progress, against improving in even the slightest way the things that were. That is the foundation of communism, right? The very first things that they focus on. This is being explained at the very beginning, that the problem is not the people, the problem is the thing, right? And if we would have just left well enough alone, everything would have been fine. We wouldn't have this problem. But now we have people who are able to go out and find a job. Granted, this was prior to the trade unions, right? Like the major ones here in the States. This was talking about guilds and not unions for the most part. And so most of the freedoms that we associate with the market are not present as of yet. There's still child labor. There are still children being forced into long hours and dangerous situations. There are still people being exploited, and I don't take away from that. The reform was necessary. I told you before, I am not an anarcho-capitalist. I do not believe that capitalism in and of itself will be the answer. Regulations are a thing, saying that we can't work children to death. I love that shit. The fact that we have a 40-hour work week as a basis, that's good shit. That gives you time to do things for yourself. These are good things. You have the ability here to negotiate right? If you don't like this job, leave. You can find another one. That has not been the case. And they are arguing heavily against you being able to do that. They are arguing heavily for the caste system that says you were born a farmer, you will stay a farmer. That's what they're arguing for. It is couched in language of equality, right? It is couched in language, but that doesn't change the fact of it. They want you to still be the laborer. They just want you to trick you, or want to trick you into thinking that it makes a difference, right? You can, at least here in the United States, get a job and then go into direct competition with the company that you're working for. That is something you can do here. You can get a job in a machinist shop and learn to do machinist work, right? Become a certified machinist through this employer who is giving you the training. And then you can quit and go to work across the street doing the same thing and make your own money at a different wage. That's capitalism. The regulation of capitalism is taking away the harmful parts, right? I'm going to work you 12 hours a day and you get no extra money for that. I'm going to work you 50 hours a week and you don't get any extra for that. And as a matter of fact, if you don't like it, I will fire you, right? That is where the regulation comes in. Not in, well, you have to go to work here. That is dumb. People are inclined in different ways. You absolutely should be able to do what you want. But that doesn't mean you get to do it immediately. You can here grind for what you want. And that is new. That is new shit. That is not old shit. And they are arguing for the old shit. I am not a fan of that. Owing to the extensive use of machinery and to division of labor, the work of the proletarians has lost all individual character and consequently all charm for the workman. He becomes an appendage. This is mindset. An appendage of the machine, and it is only the most simple, most monotonous, and most easily acquired knack that is required of him. Hence, the cost of production of a workman is restricted almost entirely to the means of subsistence that he requires for his maintenance and for the propagation of his race. But the price of a commodity, and therefore also of labor, is equal in the long run to the cost of its production. No. In proportion, therefore, as the repulsiveness of the work increases, the wage decreases. Not necessarily. Nay, more, in proportion to the use of machinery and division of labor increase, in the same proportion the burden of toil also increases, whether by prolongation of the working hours, by increase of the work exacted in a given time, or by increased speed of the machinery, etc. It's not a bad thing. Modern industry has converted the little workshop of the patriarchal master into the great factory of the industrial capitalist. Masses of laborers crowded into the factory are organized like soldiers. As privates of the industrial army, they are placed under the command of a perfect hierarchy of officers and sergeants. Not only are they slaves of the bourgeoisie class and of the bourgeoisie state, they are, daily and hourly, enslaved by the machine, by the overseer, and, above all, by the individual bourgeoisie manufacturer himself. The more openly this despotism proclaims gain to be its end and aim, the more petty and more hateful and more embittering it is. The less skill and exertion of strength is implied in manual labor, in other words, the more modern industry becomes developed, the more is the labor of men superseded by that of women. Differences of age and sex no longer any distinctive social validity for the working class. All are instruments of labor, more or less expensive to use, according to age and sex. No sooner is the exploitation of the laborer by the manufacturer so far at an end that he receives his wages in cash, than he is set upon by the other portions of the bourgeoisie, the landlord, the shopkeeper, the pawnbroker. Like pawnbroking is not entirely fucking optional. The lower strata of the middle class, the small tradespeople, shopkeepers, and retired tradesmen generally, the handicraftsmen and peasants, all these sink gradually into the proletariat, partly because of their diminutive capital does not suffice for the scale on which modern industry is carried on and is swamped in the competition with the large capitalists, partly because their specialized skill is rendered worthless by new methods of reproduction. Thus, the proletariat is recruited from all classes of the population. The proletariat goes through various stages of development. When its birth begins a struggle with the bourgeoisie. At the first, contest is carried on by individual laborers, then by the workpeople of a factory, then by the operatives of one trade in one locality against the individual bourgeoisie who directly exploits them. They direct their attacks not against the bourgeoisie conditions of production, but against the instruments of production themselves. They destroy imported wares that compete with their labor. They smash to pieces machinery. They set factories ablaze. They seek to restore by force the vanished status of the workmen of Middle Ages. At this stage, the laborers still form an incoherent mass scattered over the whole country and broken up by their mutual competition. If anywhere they unite to form more compact bodies, this is not yet the consequence of their own active union, but the union of the bourgeoisie, which class, in order to attain its own political ends, is compelled to set the whole proletariat in motion and is, moreover yet, for a time, able to do so. At this stage, therefore, the proletarians do not fight their enemies, but the enemies of their enemies, the remnants of absolute monarchy and landowners, the non-industrial bourgeoisie, the petty bourgeoisie. Thus, the whole historical movement is concentrated in the hands of the bourgeoisie. Every victory is so obtained is a victory for the bourgeoisie. But with the development of industry, the proletariat not only increases in number, it becomes concentrated in greater masses. Its strength grows, and it feels that strength more. The various interests and conditions of life within the ranks of the proletariat are more and more equalized, in proportion as machinery obliterates all distinctions of labor, and nearly everywhere reduces wages to the same low level. The growing competition among the bourgeoisie and the resulting commercial crises make the wages of the worker ever more fluctuating. The unceasing improvement of machinery, ever more rapidly developing, makes their livelihood more and more precarious. The collisions between individual workmen and individual bourgeoisie takes more and more the character of collisions between two classes. Thereupon the workers begin to form combination, trades unions, against the bourgeoisie. They club together in order to keep up the rate of wages. They found permanent associations in order to make provisions beforehand for these occasional revolts. Here and there, the contest breaks out into riots. Now and then the workers are victorious, but only for a time. The real fruit of their battles lie not in the immediate results, but in the ever improved means of communication that are created in modern industry and that place the workers of different localities in contact with one another. It was just this contact that was needed to centralize the numerous local struggles, all of the same character, into one national struggle between classes. But every class struggle is a political struggle, and that union, to attain which the workers of the Middle Ages, with their miserable highways, required centuries, the modern proletarians, thanks to railways, achieve in a few years. This organization of the proletarians into a class and consequently into a political party is continually being upset again by the competition between the workers themselves. But it ever rises up again, stronger, firmer, mightier. It compels legislative recognition of particular interests by the workers by taking advantage of the divisions among the bourgeoisie itself. Thus, the 10 Hours Bill in England was carried. Altogether, collisions between the classes of the old society further, in many ways, the course of the development of the proletariat. The bourgeoisie finds itself involved in a constant battle, at first with the aristocracy, later on with those portions of the bourgeoisie itself whose interests have become antagonistic to the progress of industry, at all times with the bourgeoisie of foreign countries. In these countries it sees itself compelled to appeal to the proletariat to ask for its help, and thus to drag it into the political arena. The bourgeoisie itself, therefore, supplies the proletariat with weapons for fighting the bourgeoisie. Further, as we have already seen, entire sections of the ruling classes are, by the advance of industry, precipitated into the proletariat, or are at least threatened into their conditions of existence. These, also, supply the proletariat with fresh elements of enlightenment and progress. Finally, in times when the class struggle nears the decisive hour, the process of dissolution going on within the ruling class, in fact, within the whole range of old society, assumes such a violent, glaring character that a small section of the ruling class cuts itself adrift and joins the revolutionary class, the class that holds the future in its hands. Just as, therefore, at an earlier period the section of the nobility went over to the bourgeoisie, so now a portion of the bourgeoisie goes over to the proletariat, and, in particular, a portion of the bourgeoisie ideologists. I know the word and I can't pull it out. Ideologists, who have raised themselves to the level of comprehending theoretically the historical movement as a whole. Of all the classes that stand face to face with the bourgeoisie today, the proletariat alone is a really revolutionary class. The other classes decay and finally disappear in the face of modern industry. The proletariat is its special and essential product. The lower middle class, the small manufacturer, the shopkeeper, the artisan, the peasant, all these fight against the bourgeoisie to save from extinction their existence as fractions of the middle class. They are, therefore, not revolutionary, but conservative. Nay, more, they are reactionary, for they try to roll back the wheel of history. If, by chance, they are revolutionary, they are only so in view of their impending transfer into the proletariat. They thus defend not their present, but their future interests. They desert their own standpoint to place themselves at that of the proletariat. The dangerous class, the social scum, that passively rotting class thrown off by the lowest layers of old society, may, here and there, be swept into the movement by a proletarian revolution. Its conditions of life, however, prepare it far more for the part of a bribed fool of reactionary intrigue. And the conditions of a proletariat, those of the old society at large, are already virtually swamped. The proletariat is without property. His relation to his wife and children has no longer anything in common with the bourgeoisie family relations. Modern industrial labor, modern subjection to capital, the same as in England as in France, in America as in Germany, has stripped him of every trace of national character. Law, morality, religion are to him so many bourgeoisie prejudices, behind which lurk in ambush just as many bourgeoisie interests. All the preceding classes that got the upper hand sought to fortify their already acquired status by subjecting society at large to their conditions of appropriation. The proletarians cannot become masters of the productive forces of society except by abolishing their own previous mode of approbation, and thereby, also, every other previous mode of approbation. They have nothing of their own to secure and to fortify. Their mission is to destroy all previous securities for, and insurances of, individual property. All previous historical movements were movements of minorities, or in the interest of minorities. The proletarian movement is the self-conscious, independent movement of the immense majority, in the interest of the immense majority. The proletariat, the lowest stratum of our present society, cannot stir, cannot raise itself up without the whole superincumbent strata of official society being sprung into the air. Though not in substance, yet in form, the struggle of the proletariat with the bourgeoisie is at first a national struggle. The proletariat of each country must, of course, first of all, settle matters within its own bourgeoisie. In depicting the most general phases of development of the proletariat, we trace the more or less veiled civil war raging within existing society up to the point where that war breaks out into open revolution and where the violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie lays the foundation for the sway of the proletariat. Hitherto, every form of society has been based, as we have already seen, on the antagonism of oppressing and oppressed classes. But in order to oppress a class, certain conditions must be assured to it, under which it can, at least, continue its slavish existence. The serf, in the period of serfdom, raised himself to membership in the commune, just as the petty bourgeoisie, under the yoke of feudal absolutism, managed to develop into a bourgeoisie. The modern laborer, on the contrary, instead of rising with the progress of industry, sinks deeper and deeper below the conditions of existence of his own class. He becomes a pauper, and pauperism develops more rapidly than population and wealth. And here it becomes evident that the bourgeoisie is unfit any longer to be the ruling class in society and to impose its conditions of existence upon society as an overriding law. It is unfit to rule because it is incompetent to assure an existence to its slave within his slavery, because it cannot help letting him sink into such a state that it has to feed him instead of being fed by him. Society can no longer live under this bourgeoisie. In other words, its existence is no longer compatible with society. The essential condition for the existence and for the sway of the bourgeoisie class is the formation and augmentation of capital. The condition for capital is wage labor. Wage labor rests exclusively on competition between the laborers. The advance of industry, whose involuntary promoter is the bourgeoisie, replaces the isolation of the laborers due to competition by their revolutionary combination due to association. The development of modern industry, therefore, cuts from under its feet the very foundation on which the bourgeoisie produces and appropriates products. What the bourgeoisie therefore produces, above all, are its own gravediggers. Its fall and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. And so ends this section, Bourgeoisie and Proletariat. We got a lot of ignorance here. I wish that there was another way to say it, but there's really not. We have the argument against progress, first and foremost. We have the assumption of victimhood, secondarily. We have the assumption that change cannot happen unless there is oppression, which is a subset of victimhood, I guess, but like the entirety of this reads like a pissed off old man, right? We would call him a boomer now, but this is well before boomers. This was a man raging against progress. I hate to see these artisans become laborers. Okay, well, here's the thing. We still have artisans. Here in the free market economy, as a matter of fact, some of our artisans do better than most of the producers. If you don't believe that, look at anybody in the music industry, right? Like, almost all of them are doing better than you are, more than likely. It doesn't mean they're bad. They found a grind. They had the freedom to choose. There are no artists in communism. It doesn't happen. You're too busy trying to not upset the people. The argument against innovation is, again, just completely an ignorant one. If it was not for innovation, there would be no point to be here. If we were to continue merely farming in the way that we did 200 years ago, there would be no point in humanity. There would be no growth in that. Of course we developed better ways to farm. Of course we did. And by doing so, we needed less laborers for this thing. So of course we found something to do with those people. We found new things. We were able, through progress, to come up with air conditioning. Air conditioning by itself has saved more people than have died in war. Death by cold and heat are very likely without air conditioning. Now, of course, people have existed forever without it, right? But now we thrive. Before, people died in numbers that are unimaginable today, even with increased numbers. Fully, half of your family could be expected to die prior to modernization, prior to medicine, prior to electricity, prior to the ability to get into a car and go to the fucking hospital. Most people died. If you got an infection, guess what? They either cut off a piece of you or you died. It was that simple. They either, like, to argue against progress itself is the ultimate in boomerism. It is the ultimate reason to dismiss anything you say. Well, back in my day, okay, well, things change. Back in my day, there was a lot different than today. Some of it is good, some of it is bad, but change is the thing that happens. And to argue against change is the ultimate in ridiculous. To assume upon yourself this level of oppression, however, man, that is ridiculous. And that is the core of communism. Like the nut in the very center is I am a victim. Because I have not taken upon myself to do better for myself, I am a victim. Because I am held back by these circumstances, I am a victim. And that might be true in some of these countries, but that is not true here. In the United States of America, you have remarkable freedom. It is a brand new experiment. The ability to choose what you want to do is not to be taken lightly. But that is not possible in communism. People like to think that it is. Well, what would you do if communism was enacted? Well, I would spend my time on my farm growing my things. No, you wouldn't. That's the state's farm. That's the state's things, and don't you dare eat a fucking potato. That's where we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion, maybe even a little bit of levity to a very serious set of consequences right here, right? These topics bear weight. People believe the shit that is in here, and that is why I am here, right? I am here to dismiss the illusions of fantasy. Whether they are on my side or your side, if I see a fantasy, I want to smash that shit apart. Not the fantasy of you creating better for yourself. That I want. But the fantasy that you're a fucking victim? No, you're not. You can be victimized. You can choose victimhood. But there ain't nobody oppressing you in the United States of America. And if you think they are, you're oppressing yourself. If you like what I'm doing here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. Hey, whether you agree or disagree, if it remains respectful, it remains up. I am open to change, but it is not likely that I will. I have spent a long time thinking about these things. I stand where I stand through logic and knowledge, right? The two pieces, the two pillars by which I am trying to build my entire life. And so, if you like what I'm doing, let me know. I am up for correction, but it is not likely to happen. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks, because I am a capitalist. I will hope I am bringing value to you and that you find value in it and wish to invest in me. That is capitalism, not communism. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit State. Peace.